February 2018. In a remote area of eastern Syria. From inside a gas plant, US commandos and Kurdish fighters see tanks and armed men approaching. Over the radio airwaves, Russian voices are heard amidst the advancing masses. The US military call their counterparts in Moscow and ask them what's happening. The Russians say they have absolutely no idea. The men are coming closer and closer. Conflict is now inevitable. So what's going on? Who are the rogue Russian fighters moving towards the Konoko gas plant? And what on earth are they doing in the middle of Syria? This was the most serious confrontation between the United States and Russia since the Vietnam War. American troops ended up firing directly on the Russians. Hundreds of fighters were killed. Trying to get to the bottom of the battle, Western governments, security services and journalists investigated. One name kept coming up: the Wagner Group. And not just in Syria, but in trouble spots all around the world. Russia's goal is to confuse things and leave what it considers its opponents, including the US military, unsure about how to react to what's going on. What's really striking is that in September 2018, Vladimir Putin pushed for a new law to be passed that said that any information concerning groups who cooperated with Russian intelligence agencies, but who were not directly employed by those agencies, was now retrospectively classified. What that essentially meant was that any investigative reporter who tries to figure out what the Wagner Group or any other group like it is doing can be prosecuted for high treason, for revealing state secrets. That's all very well for the Kremlin, to sow confusion, but it could result in a situation that becomes extremely fraught and lead to a potential escalation that can become very dangerous with very powerful military opponents such as Russia and the United States. The worst-case scenario is that a misjudgment leads to a direct military confrontation between Russian and US forces on the ground. In one form or another, mercenary forces have existed as long as there has been organized warfare. In its modern form, such armed formations are called PMCs, private military contractors. In developed countries, PMCs are a well-established business area. The volumes of the world market for PMCs are huge. According to the estimates of the London-based non-profit organization War on Want, the market for military consulting services has an annual turnover of $100 billion to $400 billion. Russia has a rich military history, and throughout the centuries, in large and small conflicts alike, Russians have fought as few others have. Therefore, the emergence of Russians in the private military services market was only a matter of time. The history of modern Russian PMCs dates back to the 1990s, when the first so-called Russian volunteers went to fight on the Serbian side in Yugoslavia. It's safe to say that the Russians could not go abroad with weapons and combat gear and participate in hostilities without the authorization of the Russian leadership. Without the participation of Russian special services and the Russian government, this would have been impossible. It was under the same scheme that the Kremlin sent mercenaries linked with the special services of the Russian Federation, under the guise of volunteers inspired by the ideals of protecting Russia's interests, to Transnistria and Nagorno-Karabakh, and later to Georgia, the Crimea, the Donbas in eastern Ukraine and Syria. Dr. Sergei Sushankin is a university lecturer and a research fellow at Jamestown Foundation in Washington, D.C. The UN General Assembly's report on mercenary activity was based on his study of the activities of Russian PMCs.
We can attribute the following functions to the Russian PMCs, and here are three key functions that are performed, that are carried out by Russian PMCs. First of all, it's economic function, which is realized, which is conducted via the concept called power economy. Secondly, it's a geopolitical function, sort of promotion of Russian national interests abroad, which was underscored by President Vladimir Putin back then, not president, in 2012. And a military strategic function in a form of asymmetric response, which was demonstrated in many ways in Syria and beyond.
However, there came a moment when the activities of PMCs in Russia had to be regulated. This would not only legalize the participation of Russians in private military companies, but would also enable the Kremlin to create PMCs legally to achieve its military and political goals outside of Russia. One of the first attempts to resolve the issue of PMCs was the amendment to the Russian law on arms in 2008, which entitled the foreign security personnel of giant oil companies such as Transneft, Lukoil and Gazprom to use duty weapons to ensure the security of oil facilities. Colonel Oleg Zhdanov is a military expert and a former operational control officer with the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces.
И теперь смотрите, получается, что государство вливает деньги в государственную компанию для ее, там, допустим, развития, да, и уже государственная компания финансирует вот этот департамент, у которого есть частные фирмы, с которыми заключены договора. При этом осуществляется прикрытие вот этих людей под видом охранных структур. Они могут выезжать в любую точку мира, где есть интересы «Газпрома». Даже если едет делегация «Газпрома», допустим, они ее сопровождают в качестве, допустим, охраны. При этом оформляются грузы и документы на вывоз оружия, спецснаряжения и так далее и тому подобное. А прибыв в эту страну, естественно, они могут выполнять, опять же, имея контракт с частной охранной фирмой или имея через нее контракт с государством Россия, они могут выполнять любые задачи, которые им ставит их руководство.
On the eve of the 21st century, Russia was experiencing rather difficult economic and social conditions, and, coupled with the general devastation at the turn of the millennium, a civil war began in Chechnya that required significant human resources. This further destabilized Russian society as well as the economy. It was only after the end of the Second Chechen Campaign in 2009 when thousands of young men who had volunteered to fight were left out of work, that the idea of organizing and supervising PMCs began to take shape within the military establishment.
И я вам скажу, что вербовкой вот этих людей в первую очередь занимаются военкоматы. Почему? Потому что у них есть моб-ресурс, они знают, кто где проходил службу, кто в каких подразделениях служил. Эти люди приглашаются, с ними проводятся беседы, они формально заключают контракт вроде как с вооруженными силами Российской Федерации. Но они, в то же время они дают подписку о том, что если в ходе выполнения операции они попадают в плен, ну, если их убивают или калечат, естественно, государство берет какие-то там функции социальные на себя, типа выплаты страховки и так далее. Но если они попадают в плен той стране, где они совершают, то мы вас не знаем, вы никто и звать вас никак. Это кстати, принцип того же французского легиона.
But despite a number of attempts to regulate this tool, the official status of PMCs in Russia remains unsettled at the legislative level. It's most likely that the creation of a full-fledged legal and regulatory framework in Russia has not been brought to fruition because the dual attitude of the law to the PMCs allows the Kremlin to better control these paramilitary organizations and to quickly dispatch with undesirable elements according to the letter of the law. One of the most talked about and yet most shadowy Russian mercenary units is the private military company known as the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group, which does not exist on paper, got its name from its purported founder and commander, the elusive and camera-shy Dmitry Utkin. Because of his obsessive fascination with the history of the Third Reich and Hitler's favorite composer, he received the nom de guerre, Wagner. Dmitry Utkin was born in June 1970. He was a lieutenant colonel and brigade commander of a special forces unit of the Russian military intelligence, or GRU, until 2013. After retiring, he became the commander of a unit of mercenaries fighting in Syria that lost a battle with Al-Qaeda-linked militants. The unit then fell out with its Syrian government paymasters over who was to blame. The Syrian mission ended up in shambles, with Russia's FSB arresting many of the returning mercenaries and charging them with unlawful warfare abroad. This is the requisite crime for mercenary work, which is officially illegal in Russia. But by early 2014, many of the people who were involved with the mercenaries who fought in Syria were back in demand. As Russia needed quick and deniable military presence in Crimea, the concept of a private, legally unincorporated shadow army employing skilled soldiers with prior combat experience appeared to be the perfect solution. And various investigations by Russian journalists have revealed that the idea of creating a deniable, off-balance private army came from high-ranking officers from Russia's defense ministry. Major General Viktor Yahun is a Ukrainian military and public figure. He's a specialist in counterintelligence and is the former deputy chairman of the SBU, the Security Service of Ukraine, from March 2014 to June 2015.
Давня традиція використання цих таких військових підрозділів без прив'язки до Збройних сил і починаючи, тобто навіть ще з часів давніх часів, будемо так казати, ще з часів імперських. І тут з'явилася на полі таких дій з'явилася американська компанія приватна, яка у всіх була на слуху, Blue Water, тобто вона показала, як можна використовувати людей з досвідом бойових дій в приватних цілях або під прикриттям державних інтересів. І Росія схопилася за цей мотив. Тобто в головному управлінні, це називається головне управління Генерального штабу, не ГРУ, як ми звикли, було створено певний підрозділ, який почав збирати дані на таких людей. Вони і так в них вже були, але вони просто там були розкидані по різних точках, до різних підрозділів, хто там був на ФСБ замкнутий, хто ще. Але, як правило, ФСБ – це внутрішні проблеми, а тут стояло питання про досвід військових дій і про зовнішнє використання.
While Dmitry Utkin has been widely presented as the frontman of the Wagner Group, there is ample data suggesting that his role was more of a field commander and that the mercenaries are integrated in an overall chain of command under central Kremlin control with its military intelligence or GRU apparatus.